So Micah 2, and it's page 931 in your pew Bibles. So human plans and God's plan. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light, they carry it out, because it is in their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes, and they rob them of their inheritance. Therefore, the Lord says, I am planning disaster against this people, for which you cannot save yourselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. In that day, the people will ridicule you. They will taunt you with their mournful songs. We are utterly ruined. My people's possession is divided up. He takes it from me. He assigns our fields to traitors. Therefore, you will have no one in the assembly of the Lord to divide the land by lots. False prophets. Do not prophesy, their prophets say. Do not prophesy about these things. Disgrace will not overtake us. Your descendants of Jacob should be said, does the Lord become impatient? Does he do such things? Do not my words do good to the one whose ways are upright? Lately, my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without care, like men returning from battle. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing from their children forever. Go up, go away, for this is not your resting place, because it is defiled. It is ruined beyond all remedy. If a liar and a deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you, plenty of wine and beer, that would be just the profit for this people. Deliverance promised. I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a sheepfold, like a flock in its own pasture. The place with throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. Can I get a show of hands if you are the sort of person who lies in bed at night, wide awake, plotting evil and carries it out first thing in the morning when your alarm clock goes off? No takers. That's interesting. You might not know me. My name is Matt. I've been around at B&A with my family since last summer, and so I've not had a chance to meet lots of you. And so it's helpful to get that gauge on who I'm talking to this morning, because it's interesting. If we don't relate that well to the people that Micah starts this passage by calling out, what are we meant to do with a passage like this on a Sunday morning? Is it worth anything more to us than a biblical history lesson? We had an intro to Micah last week from Wayne, and he introduced that we're reading some excerpts from Micah's ministry, which lasted for about 50 years and was about 700 years before Jesus was born. So at this point, God's people, the kingdom of Israel, are split into two kingdoms, and Micah is preaching to both of them. And Wayne helped us to examine our reactions to the idea of judgment. And he encouraged us that God's judgment is a good thing. It's an act of love that is designed to restore and to heal and to renew. And this passage that we've heard this morning continues on that theme of judgment from Micah 1. And we see these strong messages of judgment in this passage. But since no one confessed to being the sort of person that Micah is talking to, what does his message mean for us today? Sometimes with the Bible, it's really as simple as picking it up and reading it like a good old book, and you can just open the pages and the meaning jumps off the pages. You'll find that God is speaking to you, and it's kind of straightforward. You'll be challenged, you'll be encouraged, you'll be inspired, you'll be getting the message, and sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's really helpful to have some tools and some techniques to approach the Bible with, whether it's a passage that seems clear or seems a bit more obscure. And one of the first questions that I always ask is, what sort of literature am I reading? Are we looking at part of the Bible that is a historic narrative? Or is it poetry? Or is it a biography? With Micah, we know that he is a prophet. And so the type of literature that we're dealing with is prophecy. What comes to your mind when you hear the word prophecy? Maybe there's some biblical things. Maybe you can think of some other prophets in the Bible. Maybe your mind goes more to fiction and to fantasy or sci-fi, where we get this kind of narrative device often in fantasy stories of a prophecy, which is a telling of the future. And it's normally cryptic and it's obscure, but it gives us a glimpse of what's to come. And prophecy in the Bible does have an element of that. We call it foretelling, giving us a glimpse of what's to come down the line. But actually, prophecy in the Bible is perhaps more characterized by something that we call forthtelling. We have foretelling and we have forthtelling, which is the speaking forth, the declaring of God's timeless truths, looking at where we are now and declaring what we know to be true about God and about us. And so we've got these two things that we should be expecting as we approach a book like Micah: foretelling and forthtelling. And so there's three questions, essentially, that I've used to approach this passage. And if you're reading along with Micah as we go through this series, which is a great thing to do, then I'd encourage you in the next week to be thinking about this question as you start reading Micah 3. So 3 questions. The first 2 are in this category of forthtelling. What's going on now? And they are, what does God care about? And how are we measuring up against that? And then we move on to the foretelling. What is God going to do about it? So we can expect from a book like Micah a prophecy to have revealed to us what God cares about, how we measure up against that, and what God is going to do about it. So, firstly, what does God care about? What does this passage show us? The passage starts with a warning against these people who are lying awake at night, plotting evil, and they're rushing to carry it out first thing in the morning. Micah gives a really interesting set of examples of what this evil is. And I don't know about you, but I find that I have to slow myself down at points like this in the Bible, because I've got a really bad habit of seeing a word like evil or a word like sin and actually sort of reading into it my preconceptions of what is evil and what is sin and what does God care about, rather than letting the passage speak on its own terms. And if we allow this passage to speak on its own terms and for Micah to speak to us, we see that he's zooming in on this really specific set of problems. Micah 2 is all about power and money. He's talking about economic oppression. God cares about how people use power and money and the impact that it has on other people. And what we see is that Micah's audience originally were not measuring up well against this at all. At this time, there's a real rich-poor divide in Israel. Micah is seeing the rich get richer while the poor are getting poorer. And he's calling it out. If you are someone with the power and the means to do wrong, then Micah's coming for you. In Israel at this time, there's this powerful, wealthy, ruling class. And then there's sort of everyone else. God sees what they're doing. One commentator says that In the period just prior to these years, Israel and Judah, the two kingdoms, had risen to the heights of economic affluence, but had fallen to the depths of spiritual decadence. The well-off in the society are stealing from and defrauding and exploiting the poor and the vulnerable. And all of this is happening in the people that God had claimed and called as his own. The people that he had rescued from slavery. He had rescued their ancestors from economic oppression themselves. He had settled them in this land that is overflowing with milk and honey despite their disobedience, not because they'd somehow earned it. These people are only where they are because of God's generosity and his grace. And all that he requires of them really in return is to love him and to love one another. In Deuteronomy 15, God says, "There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed towards your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land." Exodus 22 says, "Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows and your children fatherless." There's not much room for plausible deniability there. And yet, the powerful, Micah says, are driving widows out of their homes. They are dispossessing the fatherless. And God has heard their cry. So if Micah's original audience, the best part of 3,000 years ago, weren't measuring up well against this, how are we doing now? There probably aren't many people anywhere, not just here today, who would hear this and would think, I'm one of those people that Micah is talking about. But we can probably each think of some people that we would put in that camp. What's the heart of Micah's message? Perhaps he's talking in the context of some sort of mafia rule where the bad guys kind of know that they're the bad guys and actually are a bit proud of being the bad guys. But actually, I think more likely, the people that he's calling out as planning and plotting this evil see themselves as acting within their rights and doing what they are meant to do within this society. Today, their defenses might be, we're not plotting evil, we're just planning our corporate strategy. Or we're not planning iniquity, we're just planning our family finances. Micah is reminding us that the way that economic inequality and oppression has been normalized and has just been part of the way that we do things is not compatible with God's heart and God's vision for his people. If in the New Testament, Jesus points to murder and he says, being angry is just as bad. And he points to adultery and he says, being lustful is just as bad. If he were to point to these things that Micah is talking about, this defrauding people, this theft, what would he point to in our lives and say, that's just as bad. That's got the same roots. So that's what we're looking for this morning. While we might not directly relate to the rich in Micah's time, I think it's fair to say that most of us, at least, don't really align to the poor either. Financial anxieties now are high, and that is completely reasonable as we watch savings and incomes and the cost of living getting battered about by things that are just beyond our control. But I think it's also been a real reminder in recent weeks that we live in a global economy where what we do with our money touches other people in this city and in our country and halfway around the world. And in the global scheme of things, I think it's important to remember that for most of us, at least, we do have some power and privilege and wealth. And really, we're more aligned to the haves than the have-nots in Micah's audience. So Micah's questions should raise some questions for us this morning. How often do you think about the impact that your money has on the people that are involved in making the things that you buy. When you visit the polling station, as some of us have done this week, how does your vote measure up against God's concern for the poor and the vulnerable? How does what you do at work, if you make decisions that move the dial one way or another, impact the way that people are getting treated? Whatever your immediate reaction is to those questions, and whichever resonates the most with you, I think it's really important that we try and answer this in the context of that third thing that we're looking for from prophecy, which is, what is God doing about it? So let's look at that in Micah, and then we'll come back to some of those questions. Micah's warning to his audience was firstly that God was going to bring these people down a peg or two. In the short term, he is planning disaster. God is planning disaster against these people. And it's described quite vividly. And he's going to divide up their possessions. The land that they have seized from other people, he's going to seize right back from them and going to give to their enemies. He's going to give them, as it were, a taste of their own medicine. In the middle of this passage, there's this back and forth between Micah and the people that he's calling out. And when Micah tells them what God is going to do about their sins, their response is, does the Lord become impatient? To which they think the answer is no. The sense I get is that they're saying, okay, even if we're not quite perfect, God's not going to punish us in that way. We know it's true that the Lord is slow to anger, but that is very different from turning a blind eye. It's good news for us that God is patient, and it's also good news for us that he's not indifferent. The people of Israel were losing sight of that side of God's character and his heart. They become so complacent. They become this people who had this sense of entitlement to God's favor. They become a people with selective hearing. How often are we people with selective hearing? Sometimes in the prophets, we see messages of warning that give a sense that there's still time to change. That if the people would just start doing something differently, then God might respond in a different way. But actually, in Micah, we don't really see those elements. This is much more certain. This is much more sure. This is a verdict that has been passed, and the sentence is being handed down. This disaster is coming to Israel. But what Micah foresees isn't limited to God allowing the sins of these powerful, wealthy people to catch up with them. His foretelling goes so much further than that. And the good news for us this morning is that God's justice also goes so much further. Let me just read the final two verses again to you. It says, I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head. While Israel will have to go through this time of disaster, that is not the definition or God's vision of justice. There is some sense of justice in the balancing out of things. But the justice of God is not that people get what they deserve. It's that all things are being made how they were always meant to be. The justice of God is not that people get what they deserve. It's that all things are being made how they were always meant to be. He is setting things back to the way they were always meant to be. He is reconciling all things to himself. In the long sweep of what God is doing in the world, God is not settling for balancing things out at this lowest common denominator. It's not about people having to suffer as much as they have caused suffering on other people so that there's some sense of fairness. We're not all being brought down to the same level. God is raising us all up to where he always intended us to be. God will not leave his people scattered and destroyed. He'll gather together this remnant, And this gathering, Micah tells us, is led by a figure that we could sort of summarize as being a shepherd king. We'll hear more about this figure, this shepherd king, later in Micah. But from our perspective here today, we get to put the pieces together and see that this figure that Micah is describing is Jesus. One way we can understand the whole story of the Bible is the idea that God's people were scattered. They were cast out into exile, and ever since he has been working to bring them back together, to gather the flock back, despite their failings and their diversions. And Jesus, when he starts his ministry, clearly sees himself and announces himself as fulfilling this role. It's because of Jesus going through suffering and death and emerging out the other side that we know that we will also go through suffering and death, but we will also emerge out the other side into this new life where God is making all things new. And that is the fulfillment of justice that Micah points us to. So let's bring this all together. Prophecy shows us three things: what God cares about, how we're doing against that, and what God is going to do about it. We see that God cares about how those with power and money impact others in the way that they use and abuse those things. We saw that Micah's audience weren't doing well against that, and in the short term, God was going to punish them and bring this destruction. But in the greater scheme of things, what God is doing is raising us all up to a life where he is making all things new and setting all things back on the right track. So how do we respond to this? N.T. Wright says that people who believe in the resurrection, in God making a whole new world in which everything will be set right at last, are unstoppably motivated to work for that new world in the present. Our life as followers of Jesus involves an opportunity to join in with what God is doing to see justice break in here and now. And it's not because he's relying on us. It's not because his plan is that we're going to work and we're going to somehow build this utopia and we're going to make it happen. But it's because Jesus has set us free. And so he's given us the freedom to start getting a taste of that new order now. To work to see that breaking in now. To use our power and money in a way that loves and values other people rather than exploits them now. It's something that we have been set free to do. On the other hand, we do all have our own histories with money and power and patterns that have been ingrained in us through our upbringings and through the culture around us and through what's going on in the world now. And so as we think about this, there might be elements of this where actually we find we don't feel free. We don't feel like we're free from all of the anxieties that surround some of this. And that's fair, but maybe as we step into this, as we walk in step with the Spirit and perhaps start going in a slightly different direction in our lives, what we'll find is that God will lead us to face some of those things and to work through them and to find that freedom. So, if you're a follower of Jesus, what can you be thinking about now? And there are three ways that I want to highlight this morning that as disciples of Jesus, I think we should be working for that new world to be breaking into our lives. And I'll spend a bit longer on the first one and then just really throw the second two out there. But it's really how we use our money, how we use our power, and how we use our vote. So firstly, how we use our money. We live in a global economy, as I've said, however topsy-turvy that might feel at the moment. And the things that we buy are largely based on supply chains that do stretch halfway around the world. And there are all sorts of things that we should consider when we're buying things. We should be thinking about the environmental impact of them. We should be thinking about whether it's actually a wise use of our money and the resources that we've been given. But today I'd focus on thinking about, are the people who are making the things that we're buying getting paid a fair wage at every stage? In this country, we spend over £8 billion a year on clothing, which is thought to have come from supply chains involving modern-day slavery. That's £8 billion just on clothing, where we are enabling and creating a market for people to live in slavery today. Technology is even worse. Clothing's the second worst sector for that, but it's just rife in everything that we buy. This exploitation, this economic oppression is hidden behind the things that we're buying off the shelves in shops and on websites. Farmers in this country still face selling their produce for less than it costs them to produce it on a regular basis. Nail salons and car washes are still filled with people who are victims of human trafficking. These are just a few areas that inevitably touch our lives and reach into our city. And it can be overwhelming to start questioning all of these things and questioning everything that you buy when someone like me comes and launches this upon you on a Sunday morning. But I think we can all start somewhere, or if we're thinking about this, we can all do a bit more. My starting place for this several years ago was really focusing on clothing and sort of setting myself a goal to not buy anything where I wasn't relatively confident as I could be, that it wasn't contributing to modern day slavery, and then thinking about the environmental impact as well. And what I found is, we are so used to clothing prices that are set as a direct consequence of slavery, that when we look at clothing prices that represent a fair price, it seems unaffordable, it seems outrageous, it seems luxurious. But the challenge for us is, if it doesn't seem worth paying those fair prices for, is it worth paying for at all? A great resource practically that I found in helping to navigate this was an app called Good On You, and it's like an index. You can search through clothing and beauty companies, and it scores them all and digs into the research that they've done on labor practices and on the environmental impact and the animal impact of different things. So that's really helpful. I use that whenever I'm looking for things to buy, really. We're spoilt for choice of charity shops in Bristol. A bit of work on apps like Vinted, buying things secondhand can really make a huge difference and keep your wardrobe fresh in a much more sustainable way. So that's where I started. The food is another one where we're buying things all the time, and perhaps we could be thinking about this a bit more, getting clued up on different certifications and labels. They're not perfect, but things like the fair trade mark is an easy thing to do. You don't have to change where you're going to the shop. You don't have to change when you're shopping or how you're shopping. You just have to look at a shelf of tea and go for the one that has a fair trade mark on it instead. And yes, it's going to be more expensive, but we know why. The best resource that I can recommend for kind of getting into this, and I won't dig into any other categories, is this magazine. It's called Ethical Consumer, and they publish 6 magazines a year, and they dive into all this research and rating tables of different companies, and they've got a wealth of information on their website. And so 6 times a year, that comes through my letterbox, and each one is themed around something different. So this is all about finance and banking and savings, but they'll send one a year that has milk and dairy and everything, and chocolate biscuits, and then washing machines will come a couple of months later. And it's a good introduction to all of these different things, and a good way of not being overwhelmed by thinking about this. If you're interested in subscribing to that, then you can go at the pace of every couple of months, just thinking about something a bit differently. Or if you're going to buy something specific, using their website and looking into this. And this is practically, I think, what it looks like to be working for some of this kingdom stuff, to be breaking into our lives, to be championing it. And it's so interesting, the number of conversations that I end up having about the kingdom of God because of the clothing that I've chosen to buy. People are interested, and it opens up those opportunities to speak about what we care about and the work of God in our lives as well. I won't dive into more categories, but as we journey through this, I think that God will challenge us on different things at different times. There's so much grace for this. We just need to point ourselves in the right direction and start taking some of those steps. And other things will follow. Are we supporting artists whose work we enjoy? Are the services that we use paying a living wage? What's the impact on other people of the funds that our pensions and our savings are invested in? So that's my first challenge. How are you spending your money? What impact does it have on others? We don't need to get overwhelmed. We just need to pay attention to the thing this morning that has struck that chord the most and approach it firstly with curiosity. Find out more. Maybe you're already buying from places that are doing great things and are helping people out. I said I won't spend as long on the other two challenges, but I do want to raise them for people to reflect on, and this might feel more relevant to some people this morning. So challenge 2, how are we using our power? For some people in this room, we have influence over the direction and decisions of companies and organizations. Some people, a lot of influence. How are we using that influence to steer the way that those organizations operate and spend their money, and ensuring that those organizations are operating fairly and paying people fairly and having positive impacts on communities, not negative? And the third challenge, how are we using our votes? The political parties that we vote into power have a huge impact on this. When you're at the ballot box, how much is your vote aligned with the needs of the poor and the marginalized? Do you ever write to your MP? For lots of us who live in walking distance of this church, our MP works at the heart of the Treasury in the current government, and that is a good position to be in. We can have a difference if we get things onto his radar, if we pray for him. So that's what I've got for you this morning. We might not be plotting evil on our beds and rushing to do it when our alarm clocks go off, but Micah's challenge to us today is to make sure that we're not stumbling into it either, or growing complacent. So what is the Spirit saying to you about how you use your money, how you use your power, how you use your vote? These are opportunities to join in with what God is doing, to see some of the new creation breaking into our lives here and now.